Hi, honored to see you, His Excellency. My name is Masakuni Tanimoto, Secretary General of Kyoto Peace Building Center and Global Peace Building Association of Japan. It's now the time to start. So I would like to ask Arbenita-san to start.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanimoto. Good evening, distinguished participants, and good afternoon also to Minister Murigande, because I think the time zone is different. I would like to officially open the online discussion meeting. My name is Arbenita Sopa, and I think most of you already know me. I'm External Relations Officer of Kyoto Peace Building Center and GPAJ. Today, as most of you already know, we are very lucky to have the former Foreign Minister of Rwanda, Mr. Charles Murigande. He served as Rwanda's ambassador to Japan. Minister Murigande will make a presentation in 20 to 25 minutes on post-genocide transformation of Rwanda, critical review of its achievements and the remaining challenges. Before I give the floor to Minister Murigande, I would like to also mention that after Minister Murigande's presentation, we would like to kindly request Mr. Hiroshi Kato, who is the former Vice President of JICA and now a professor at the International University of Japan, and also, last but not least, our distinguished guest, Mr. Yasushi Akashi, whom I do believe we all already know, to comment on Minister Murigande's presentation in 5 to 6 minutes. After that, we will have an open discussion that will be moderated by Dr. Sugehiro Hasegawa. And now, without further ado, to not take also your time, I would like to kindly invite Minister Murigande to start his presentation.
The title of my presentation is, as you are very much aware, Post-Genocide Transformation of Rwanda, a critical review of its achievement and remaining challenges. I'll try to go through it as quickly as possible because this is a wide subject to be covered in just 25 minutes, but I'll give it a try. The summary of my presentation, I will touch on 4 points. I would want to show how Rwanda was catapulted on the world map by the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and we'll show you the sorry state that this genocide left our country in. Then I'll touch on what we have achieved in trying to transform this country and show that though we were projected on the world map by that terrible event, we are maintained on the world map by the successful post-conflict transformation that we have achieved. In terms of discussing the challenges that remain, I will show you that though Rwanda is not a paradise, it is not the hell that some ill-intentioned people labor hard to describe it. And then as a kind of conclusion, I state that Rwanda is confident to achieve its stated destination of being a united, peaceful, reconciled, fair, and democratic and prosperous nation. Next. Yeah, as I was saying, before 1994, very few people in the world, especially in Japan, knew where Rwanda was. We were made known, unfortunately, not because we had won a Nobel Prize or several Nobel Prizes because of important discoveries we had made or had won, let's say, the World Cup, but because of being the place where the last genocide of the 20th century took place. And that genocide left our country in a sorry state. It was a horrendous event. In just 100 days, Rwanda lost 1 million of her people. Hundreds of thousands were made orphans, widowers, or had crippling injuries. Almost all the surviving people were either internally displaced or were made refugees. I would say the entire population was traumatized and in great despair. Professor Hasegawa would recall that the central or local government had collapsed. Next. Most socio-economic infrastructures were destroyed. All movable assets looted, and the economy had been grounded to a halt. As if this was not enough, sufficiently dire, the defeated genocidal forces were still roaming around in the country and in the region, and they were busy reorganizing, retraining, rearming, and fighting the post-genocide government. I would simply describe that the country was in chaos and total hopelessness. And actually, Rwanda fitted the definition of a failed state. Some went to the extent of suggesting to divide that small country of Rwanda into two countries, the Hutu land and the Tutsi land. But of course, the people of Rwanda rejected such a hopeless proposal. This is the situation that we inherited from the 1994 genocide. What did we do to uplift ourselves from that bottomless pit in which the genocide, the 1994 genocide, left us? Next. We made three good and important choices that have enabled Rwanda to move from being a failed state in which chaos and hopelessness prevailed to a thriving nation where order and hopefulness abound. First of all, we decided to stay together as a people, whereas many were suggesting that Rwanda was just a hopeless case. There was little or no possibility for the Rwandan people to come together and rebuild one nation, one thriving nation. We rejected those prophecies of doom, and we decided to stay together as a people and forge unity and reconciliation. There are some important decisions that were made. First of all, though the Rwandese Patriotic Front had confronted single-handedly the genocide and stopped it and defeated the genocidal government and would have been justified to act like any other organization in the world where the winner takes it all, it rejected that natural sentiment, but rather invited all political forces except one political party that had spearheaded genocide and formed a national unity government, but the way a government in which the Rwandese Patriotic Front was not even the majority. We also put in place a transitional assembly in which the RPF was not the majority, just to show that the RPF had not fought for the sake of power. We set out to unite and reconcile the people of Rwanda and lead the people of Rwanda toward unity and democracy. The second biggest decision or choice we made is that of being accountable. We set out to develop a governance that would have as a hallmark transparency and accountability, where nobody is above the law, and where corruption is fought vigorously, and where the people of Rwanda are the center of governance. Every policy must be geared toward improving the life of the people of Rwanda. The third most important choice we made is that of thinking big for our country. Rwanda is a small country, not endowed with great natural resources, but we believed that we have the capacity to uplift ourselves out of poverty and achieve development like any other people in the world. That notion of dignity, that belief in ourselves has helped us to be daring and dream big for our country. These three choices are what led to the successful post-conflict transformation that I will briefly touch on. If you look at where we are and where we are coming from, today, I would say Rwanda is a peaceful, stable, reconciled, united, and well-governed country. Millions of internally displaced and refugees were repatriated, resettled, and most perpetrators of genocide were held accountable through several approaches. Like for justice, we not only came up with a great idea of Gacaca courts, we also mobilized the international community to set up the International Court Tribunal for Rwanda. We created several commissions like the Unity and Reconciliation Commission, like the Human Rights Commission. We put in place an ombudsman to make sure that Rwandans are encouraged to understand their past, learn lessons from their past, and then envisage together and cohesively a better future. In terms of good governance, we really, I would say Rwanda is well governed, and we have a governance that is characterized by inclusiveness, transparency, efficiency, and effective government. Most of you would know that we have the highest representation of women in the parliament, in the cabinet. In the parliament, we have 61%, in the cabinet, 52%. We are ranked almost consistently the third least corrupt African country, according to Transparency International. And we are the 7th most efficient government according to World Economic Forum. We are the 6th safest country in the world for solo travelers, according to Use Bounce. Kigali is the cleanest city. So I'm just giving these as examples of elements that show good governance in Rwanda. Next. We are also we are also a responsible global citizens. You know, today Rwanda though is a small country with 12.5 million people. We are the 4th largest troop contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. Rwanda has had big leading roles on UN MDGs. You know, our President Paul Kagame co-chaired the UN MDGs. He still co-chairs the UN Broadband Commission. We served on the UN Security Council. We once chaired the African Union, the AU NEPAD. The president is chairing the AU NEPAD. On ESC, we've been one of the most active member. And then Rwandans have served in very high position such as president of AFDB. We have the current Secretary General of OEF. Though we recently joined the Commonwealth just 10 years ago, we are about to become the chair of the Commonwealth, showing that not only we moved out of that place where we were in 1994, where people had no hope whatsoever of the future of Rwanda, to a place where Rwanda is playing somehow a leading role in the world affairs. I would also say that Rwanda is on the right path to development. We are one of the fastest and inclusive we have one of the fastest and inclusive economic growth in Africa, on average 7.5% per annum growth since 2007. And it is a growth that is inclusive because it has led to really many improvements in the living standards of Rwandans. Like life expectancy increased from 48.6 to 68.7 years. 20 years increase in life expectancy in just 20 years. Mortality rate for children under 5 has fallen from 196 deaths per 1,000 births in 2000 to 45 per 100 births in 2020. Next. Maternal mortality dropped from 1,160 per 100,000 women in 2000 to 203 per 100,000 women in 2020. We have achieved a 9-year basic education. We are moving toward 12-year basic education. Here, I mean, all children of Rwanda are assured of achieving 9-year basic education, and very soon will be guaranteeing them to achieve 12-year basic education. Electrification of Rwanda has increased from 6% to 68% in just 20 years. We are ranked the second for the doing business climate in Africa. We are ranked first in ESC and 5th in Africa for IT network readiness. We are ranked second in MICE in Africa. We have one of the fastest growing and most reliable airlines in Africa. I just cite some examples to show that we are on the right path toward development. Next. All this said, I would say that, yes, we've traveled a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Or we still have a lot of challenges. Though I focused on the things we have achieved, believe me, I'm not trying to convince you that Rwanda is a paradise. But the other thing I would say, Rwanda is definitely not a hell, as some ill-intentioned people would want to describe it. Yes, we still have a lot of distance to cover on our journey toward unity, peace, stability, and democracy and good governance. We still have people who, up to now, are denying that genocide has ever happened, or are even trying to minimize the extent of that genocide. And this hurt tremendously survivors and jeopardizes, at least slows us on our journey toward unity and reconciliation. Many of the people who were involved in the planning and implementing the genocide are still bent on dividing and setting the people of Rwanda against each other. Unfortunately, in these attempts, those who were sympathizers with them then are still sympathizing with them and supporting them in their attempt to destabilize Rwanda. We still have an insecure regional environment, which many of the people, especially these genocidal forces and those who have fallen out with our government, mainly because of being held accountable if they misbehave, they take advantage of this insecure regional environment to organize and try to destabilize Rwanda. Of course, I would also say, though we've made a lot of progress in fighting poverty, though we have had inclusive growth, poverty still remains a big challenge. When we say that we have about 35% of our people under the poverty line, and that poverty line is not the same as the poverty line in Japan, in Europe, or America. It's still a very low poverty line. So we still have a huge, a high percentage of our population under poverty, which render them easy prey to manipulators. Next. On our journey to economic growth, development, and prosperity, we are still very vulnerable to international crises, such as the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19, the Russia-Ukraine war, the climate change. All these affect us terribly because we are already not a very strong economy, though we are an economy that is making progress, but we are progressing from a very low base. Therefore, these international shocks affect us in a severe way. We have also some natural and circumstantial constraints. Rwanda being a small landlocked country with no huge natural resources, this affects our speed toward economic growth and development and prosperity. I can give you an example. For the last 20 years, we have been planning to to build a railway that would connect Rwanda to the Indian Ocean. But this is not something we can do by ourselves. We have to convince the countries where this railway will go through, either Tanzania, if we want to connect with Dar es Salaam port, or Uganda and Kenya if we want to connect to Mombasa. And it will depend on the will of this government. So landlockedness is a big challenge. And you know, the closest port to Rwanda is that of Dar es Salaam, which is at 1,400 kilometers. And this makes our imports, our export extremely costly. We can't develop heavy industry and be competitive. That's why we even have been tremendously investing in ICT and knowledge economy, because knowledge does not need trains to be transported, and knowledge products can travel by air. So that's why we have really been focusing on knowledge economy. We still have a rapidly growing population, and because our economy is not growing as fast as we would want to offset the problems that comes with rapidly growing population, this remains a constraint that we have to deal with. And though we've invested massively and tremendously in education, we were coming from a very low base. Having been a minister of education in the past, I can tell you that in 1994, Rwanda had only 50,000 students in secondary school and 3,500 students in university. So we had a very low human resource base, but we have really tremendously invested in it, but we still have a long way to go if we are to have the human capacity that we spur our development. Next. Let me conclude by saying that Rwanda is confident to reach its set destination of being a united, reconciled, peaceful, fair, democratic, and prosperous nation. One would ask me, where do you get that confidence? First of all, if you look at where we were and where we are now, and the progress we have made, the modest but meaningful achievement we have made so far, and against all odds, this has built in us tremendous confidence that no challenge will stand forever on our way. We can confront any challenge and eventually overcome and pursue our progress. The second thing that, the second factor that gives us confidence is our good leadership, a leadership that is visionary and places the people of Rwanda at the center of all their actions. It is a selfless leadership that really has placed the people of Rwanda at the center of its preoccupation. And then, because of that good leadership, we have been able to put in place an efficient and effective government, which not only formulates clear development visions, like Vision 2020, Vision 2050, and good policies and programs, but one other characteristic of this government, it is its discipline in implementing whatever policies, whatever programs, and the vision that we set ourselves to achieve. My last word is that if Rwanda, with a lot of constraints, has been able to pull itself out of the bottomless pit in which the genocide had left us, actually no country, no nation should despair. Because if Rwanda, with all the constraints we have has been able to do it, any other nation can do it. With this, I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you very much, Minister Murigande, for a very insightful presentation and a very important message, particularly at the time that we are facing with the Ukraine crisis. Thank you very much once again. And I think without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Kato to give his comments, and then after Mr. Yasushi Akashi.
Thank you, Arbenita. And Excellency Mr. Murigande, Ambassador and Minister, and Akashi Sensei, Hasuga Sensei, and dear participants, thank you for having me to participate in this very important meeting. I'm Hiroshi Kato. I used to work for JICA for 41 years, and during the last 6 years, I served as a Senior Vice President for African Affairs, and that's when I came to know Rwanda very closely. So my knowledge about Rwanda is rather limited, and I don't claim that I have, followed the long and difficult path for development through which Rwanda came out of chaos and hopelessness, which Ambassador Murigande described at the Rwanda in 1994. So my knowledge is fairly limited in terms of time span and perhaps in depth, but nonetheless, I would like to share my thoughts, what I think about Rwanda based on my experiences of interacting with leaders of Rwanda. First point is that as Professor Murigande summarized, and Rwanda is on the right path to development, and it has set a goal of achieving a status of high-income country by 2050 in its national plan, Vision 2050, and I'm sure that Rwanda will achieve high income status by 2050 because past performances have already demonstrated the country's capacity to grow and develop its economy. As we all know, that the country has witnessed a remarkable growth rate of close to or more than 7% in the last 20 years. So I'm sure that the country will continue growing as a stable and reconciled and prosperous country in Africa. Now, there are a couple of things that I would like to share with you, and I'd like to talk about the path of development of Rwanda from the development point of view. I'm not necessarily an expert on political issues, but I'd like to talk about the economic development aspects of Rwanda's development. When I was Senior Vice President of JICA for African Affairs, I visited Rwanda maybe close to 10 times, and Rwanda was indeed my favorite country. Why I love to visit Rwanda and talk with Rwandan leaders? Because every time I visit Rwanda, I enjoy the discussions with the leaders of Rwanda, such as Minister Gatete, former finance minister and currently infrastructure minister. And I also had discussions with Minister Ndagijimana, current finance minister. And I was very much impressed that they have a very clear vision and are very eager to implement their projects and the programs. And maybe one thing that I'd like to emphasize is that now Rwanda has a very well thought out, clearly defined development goal, and the country is trying to implement such goals. I say that Rwandan goals are well thought out for some reasons. One is the country has taken thought about the country's endowments and has taken efforts to take advantage of the endowments and also to minimize the limitations by posed by some constraints. Professor Murigande talked about the landlockedness of the country, but turning this disadvantage, the country has decided to define it as a land-linked country, and some of the outcomes of this thinking is that now Rwanda is trying to make it a hub of airline networks, and it has also tried to make it a hub of intellectual interactions, like inviting international conferences. And it has also trying to turn the disadvantage of landlockedness into and make it an advantage by trying to develop a knowledge-based economy, as Professor Murigande also mentioned. So my overall impression is that Rwanda has a well thought out development goals, and which is not always commonly found in many other African countries. And the second thing I'd like to emphasize is that not only does Rwanda have well thought out development goals, they are eager to implement such programs and projects, as Professor Murigande summarized in his last slide. Every time I had a discussion with leaders like finance minister or infrastructure minister, they are very demanding to foreign aid donors like JICA, but at the same time, they always kept their words as far as their obligations are concerned. So we could trust the Rwandan government, and we knew that everything that those ministers said will be implemented to the worst. So, I can assure that the current Rwandan government has the capacity to implement various goals and defined in national development plans. And thirdly, I'd like to commend the development strategy of Rwanda because it is based on the idea that country's development depends on the thriving business activities, and it doesn't rely on foreign aid, of course, and it is very much a business-oriented development vision, which I think is very, very important and necessary. And again, those business-oriented development vision is not always commonly found in developing countries, particularly in Africa. As Professor Murigande said, that the doing business indicator is, in terms of doing business indicator, Rwanda is better than Japan. And, we have to learn from Rwanda. Japan has to learn from Rwanda in terms of how to make Japan more business friendly. And maybe the final point that I'd like to commend about the development strategy of Rwanda is that it prioritize not only ICT related service industry, but also it prioritizes agriculture. So taking into consideration the fact that still a large number of population are engaged in agriculture, the Rwandan government has prioritized the importance of developing agriculture and rural areas. And let us recall that very few countries in the world have successfully industrialized and modernized their economy without improving the productivity of agriculture and rural areas. So I'd like to commend the Rwandan government in paying due attention to the development of agricultural sector. So these are things that I particularly appreciate, the way the Rwandan government has articulated their development programs and policies. And finally, but I would like to say that as Professor Murigande highlighted toward the end of his speech, we have to acknowledge that Rwanda has a lot of things to overcome. First of all, attaining a high-income country status in 2050 is not an easy goal. And this means that the country has to keep the growth of more than 70% for the coming 20 or 25 years, and which is not an easy task. And in order for the country to achieve sustained, continuous economic growth, the country has to overcome several obstacles. The most important of which must be the lack of adequate infrastructure, and electrification is still on its way, and maybe water supply is another problem, and the transport infrastructure is still inadequate. And although the human resource indicators have improved, as presented by Professor Murigande, there are a number of things that need to be done. So I'm, optimistically cautious about the future of Rwanda. But overall, with the achievement and the capability that the country has demonstrated so far, I'm confident that the country will certainly achieve the status of high-income country by 2050. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Kato, for your informative comments. Now, without further ado, I would like to ask Mr. Yasushi Akashi to give your comments.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'm a complete amateur with regard to the subject matter which we are discussing today. But I'm keenly interested to know more about many progress and many achievements which Rwanda has attained up to today. And I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the ambassador of Rwanda and to Japan, and who was foreign minister of his country, for his very comprehensive and largely well-balanced presentation, and his very good analysis of what his country, despite many challenges, has been able to attain up to now. I visited his country only once, and I had a great pleasure of meeting with President Kagame, who was clear-cut, confident, and proud of what Rwanda has so far achieved. He was, of course, very aware of what has not been achieved, and he's very anxious to resolve remaining problems. And he expressed great friendship and confidence in countries like United States and Japan, which have been trying their best to help Rwanda. But I was somewhat disturbed by his lack of confidence about the United Nations. And I can well understand, but I think UN, like JICA in Japan, can help his country in resolving some of these remaining issues, which he calls modestly as challenges for his country. And especially in the area of reconciliation, I know how deeply his country was divided and suffered very much from deep wounds of the genocide. And it's no easy matter to resolve remaining difficulties and misunderstandings and achieve true national harmony. And in that connection, I wonder whether Ambassador American could throw somewhat more light about how he proposes to tackle this difficult, complex, and deep issue of national reconciliation in his country. The United Nations in the first part of 1990s had three most difficult questions. One is Somalia. Second came Rwanda. And the third was former Yugoslavia. Of these three, of course, first two are problems which Africa confronted. And Yugoslavia is part of Europe. And with regard to Somalia, as compared to the period of great trouble for Rwanda, Somalia has dealt with its difficulties for a much longer period. And I think it is yet to resolve, certainly not to the degree of Rwanda. Somalia still has problems. Its problems started even before Rwanda. It started, I believe, in 1992, and the UN sent UNOSOM, UNITAF, and UNOSOM 2 was dispatched, but was withdrawn. And as to former Yugoslavia, it still also suffers. Of the 6 republics in the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia-Herzegovina still is divided within the federation. And Rwanda, of these three, Rwanda stands out as a country which has courageously dealt with the difficulties and has shown much positive results. But I wonder how Ambassador Mregande proposes to solve or at least to ameliorate the issue of remaining mutual suspicions between two major racial groups in his country. I would be very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yasushi Akashi, for your very insightful comments. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Sugihiro Asigawa to moderate the open discussion or the rest of the seminar. Dr. Asigawa?
Yeah, thank you, Arvenita. Okay, I think we can now have a discussion, and perhaps we can narrow down to the issue of the governance, and also that is related to the economic factors, as Professor Kato mentioned. The Minister Murigande, may I just come back to what Mr. Akashi was asking you? I found that in your presentation, you said that this is not the problem. You have achieved a reconciliation and you have a very harmonious society. But yet Mr. Akashi was wondering if that is the case. Mr. Murigande, what is your response to that?
Yeah, I think I did not really claim that we have reached the destination. But what I tried to state is that we've made a long way. We've made progress. Whereas in 1994, very few people in the world hoped that we will ever become a nation, a fully functioning nation again, given what had happened. We've created conditions for the people of Rwanda to be able to live together peacefully. Today, we do not have a neighborhood for Hutus and a neighborhood for Tutsis. We don't have buses for Hutus and for Tutsis. In our offices, we live together. In our dormitories of our schools, people live together. But this does not mean that we have no problems. We still have people who committed genocide, who fled the country, who are still spitting their venom using YouTube, using internet, intervening on radio, preaching hatred, preaching division of the people of Rwanda. That is something we are still dealing with. But otherwise, the people in Rwanda have made a lot of progress, and we shall continue to make progress. You know, what led Rwanda to the 1994 genocide was years of divide and rule, years of a government that was preaching division, segregating the people of Rwanda, and actually dehumanizing a section of the population of Rwanda. Today, we don't have such policies. Of course, dealing away with such policies does not overnight heal the wounds that these policies have inflicted in the hearts and mind of people. But the good thing is that there is no room for such dehumanization of policies that divide the people of Rwanda. Today, the people of Rwanda are equal before law. Jobs are given through meritocracy. And we believe merit is equally distributed among the people. So we will continue to work on the remaining issues. Allow me also to address, you even recall that the government you were dealing with, in all important positions in that government, you had Hutus. The president then was a Hutu. The prime minister was a Hutu. The minister of foreign affairs was a Hutu. The minister of internal affairs was a Hutu. The minister of agriculture was a Hutu. The minister of infrastructure was a Hutu. We have always had them in majority. We have labored hard to have a balanced government, a government where you have people from all walks of people, so as to inspire confidence to the people of Rwanda, so that not a single Rwandan can sit somewhere and feel like this type of government can conspire against my group of people.
I see. Okay. Thank you so much. Now, we have actually two former ambassadors with us today. One is ambassador to Malawi, Ambassador Kai Yanaisawa, and also we also have ambassador to the United Nations and many other knowledgeable persons. So I will encourage them to also speak their minds and ask you questions, and Mr. Kato as well. Maybe if I can start with Ambassador Kai Yanagisawa or Ambassador Shinjo, what do you think, Ambassador Yanagisawa? You served in I think Malawi. How was how the situation compared with Rwanda? How do you see it, please?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Professor Morigande, for your excellent presentation. But before starting my comment, I want to make one correction about what Professor Morigande talked about. In the beginning, Professor said that Rwanda was not known to Japan before genocide, but it was not correct, because we knew Rwanda through Mr. Hattori, who served as governor of the Bank of Rwanda from 1965 to 1971. And when I was young, I read his book about his experience in the Bank of Rwanda, and I knew about Rwanda before genocide.
Yes.
So that's a correction. Okay.
I agree. There were Japanese who knew Rwanda. Not many though.
Yeah.
Even those who worked in JICA knew Rwanda. Those who worked in the foreign affairs knew Rwanda, but the general population, very few knew Rwanda.
Yeah, that's true. So let me go into my comments. And as I served as ambassador to Malawi, I knew that the situation in two countries are quite similar in terms of natural endowment. Both of them are landlocked small countries, and both of them lack many mineral resources. But there are many differences. In 1994, Malawi turned into democracy, while Rwanda experienced the terrible genocide, as you mentioned. But after that, the path of development of the two countries are significantly different, unfortunately. So while the Rwanda achieved impressive development as well as good governance, Malawi has been trapped in poverty in peace. That was quite sad to me. And in 2019, I was invited to the event for commemorating the 25th anniversary of genocide. And Rwanda ambassador showed us the film of Kigali City. And I was so shocked to say that how modernized the city was compared with the capital of Malawi. But the other difference is the political system, as you know. And while the Rwanda has good records in many aspects, as you mentioned, one statistics shows that Rwanda is lagging behind Malawi. That is the political system. And particularly that's unfortunately, the record of Rwanda is not so excellent in terms of civil participation in politics. So my question is, what is the reason for that? So is that to reduce the tension between the two different racial groups, or is that to prioritize stability of the country until the economy situation reached at some point, so that there would be no fear of their further tension? Or is there any other reasons for that? That is my question so far. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Ambassador. I would say that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, because there are people who would look at the kind of political governance we have, because it is not similar to theirs. They would tend to say, because you don't look like us, then you are not good, are not okay. In Rwanda, we have participation of the people, and we have so many NGOs, local NGOs, and they are represented at the lowest level of governance. You know, the government, I mean, the administrative structure of Rwanda is that you have a central government, then you have provinces, then you have districts, then you have sectors, and then you have cells. At every level, you have what we call JADAF, Joint Action Development Forum, bringing together all civil society organizations to discuss the challenges of faced by at that level. When any such level is formulating development plans, we have civil society participating in elections at low level, when we are electing councils, when at all these levels, or when we are electing MPs, these civil society organizations participate. But because in Rwanda, you don't see people fighting each other, throwing stone to each other, abusing each other, then people tend to say, oh, your democracy is stifled, is not vibrant. You do not insult each other in your parliament. You do not insult each other on your hit. You know, we've been encouraging people to treat each other with civility. It doesn't mean that they don't have room for participation. It is a civilized way of participating in the politics and contributing to the development of the country. Of course, some people, you didn't touch on it, some people would say, since you've forbidden people to freely express their opinion, because you've put an anti-genocide and genocide ideology law, then you are stifling the freedom of expression. And I have never heard this being said in all the countries of Europe, where you have laws forbidding people to either minimize or deny the genocide of the Jews. If you deny the genocide of the Jews, if you say the Holocaust never happened in Germany, in France, in the Netherlands, you are arrested and tried and put in jail. And yet people do not raise their voice and say you are stifling the freedom of expression in those countries. But when we do it here, and yet ours is more recent, the wounds are still bleeding, then people say you are stifling the freedom of expression. it is as if people would want us to continue to tear apart our society and our country.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Also, may I now ask Ambassador Shinyo, maybe perhaps if you can provide your views, please.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Hasegawa, and thank you very much, Ambassador Murigande, for your very far insight in the situation in your country. I was very much deeply impressed. I have a couple of comments and questions. The first is, you mentioned in your presentation that the Ukrainian war has also influenced the situation in your country, and to what extent, and what is the influence of the Ukrainian war to your station, to your country? I think the situation between your country and Ukraine is different, because I think Rwanda's case is the internal state conflicts, racial conflicts within the country, but the Ukrainian case is the state to state. It's an invasion of Russia to the other neighboring countries. But I think some elements are similar, and that is the crime against humanities and war crimes and so on and so forth was committed or allegedly committed. And so, to what extent and what was was meant by your words, the influence on your country, politics or economy? Number two is the how should I say? I think most of the countries in Africa, many countries in Africa, many countries in Asia, many countries in Europe, eastern part of Europe and Eurasian continent. I think nowadays the problem is the kleptocracy. So the ruler, which is not democratic ruler deprives everything from its nation, and this kind of the kleptocracy is not so often taking place in a country where the system is democratic. So, would you like to say that, according to your experience and according to the experience of Rwanda, that when democracy prevails, then I think such kind of the problem, like kleptocracy or corruption, perhaps reduce? And do you think that Rwanda is just ahead of this situation? Number three is, if I'm wrong, I'm not so sure whether I understand the situation correctly, but I think your country, the language is, most of the people speak French, but now I think the education language is English, and your country belongs to the Commonwealth. So it gives me an impression that this, the change of the, language, creating, English as a common language or education language, and also the participation in the Commonwealth might have been perhaps the reason why the new Rwanda was very good on foot, and integrated further in the international society. Do you think that could be the reason for present day's Rwanda? Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead. Mr. Murigande, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Shinyo. When I said that we are being affected by international crisis and cited the Russia-Ukraine war, I mentioned it when I was discussing on our journey toward economic growth, development, and prosperity. That situation is affecting us in the economic realm, not the political and governance, although maybe to a distant degree, because at the end of the day, that war is going to affect the governance of the world, and eventually, since we live in this world, we will be affected. But what I meant was mainly economic, because since the war erupted, the fuel price have climbed about 18%. Rwanda was importing most of its cooking oil, wheat from either Russia or Ukraine. And that is going to be more expensive for us to get that, and it can affect our people. So it was in that sense that I was saying that the conflict is affecting us. As to the question of kleptocracy, democracy, but I would want to refer to a speech that our president recently made on the 20th anniversary of genocide. He said that the world tends to say that there are two systems that governs the world, democracy and kleptocracy. But he said to me, there is one that is powerful, prevalent, insidious, that is governing the world. It is hypocrisy. So if you really do a thorough analysis, I think most of the world will live in hypocrisy than democracy, than kleptocracy. That said, I would say that we have tried over the last 28 years to develop a system of governance where leaders are accountable to the people. There is probably hardly any government in the world that has tried and imprisoned many leaders as ours because of corruption, for example. Because we want our leaders to be accountable to the people they govern, and if you are not delivering the services expected from you, you will be held accountable and eventually administratively be punished by being removed from your position. Of course, this does not please a lot of people. Some of the people, when they joined politics and entered in government, they wanted to enjoy the same privileges as they had seen people in government either previously in Rwanda or in other African countries. But when they are held accountable, some of them prefer to leave the country, because in my country we have a saying that a proverb that says that where you have worn kingly clothes, you don't want to wear servant clothes. So when they are removed from their position of power because of failing to deliver or failing to behave as expected from our code of leadership, many tend to leave. And I've read recently Professor Yonekawa saying that Rwanda is one of the countries that have so many former ministers and this, including a former prime minister who is living in a refugee, I mean, as refugees. But nobody forced them to go out. They left officially, and they decided not to come because they did not want to be ordinary citizens earning their living. That is something you should understand. Democracy, maybe our democracy might not look like that of US or France. By the way, these democracies don't look alike anyway. I remember telling a colleague who was saying, "Oh, you are not that rapidly developing toward democracy," and I said, he was an ambassador from Switzerland, and I told him, "Do you recall that Switzerland allowed women to vote only in 1974?
Yeah.
Yesterday in 1974.
I was in
And
Switzerland, yes.
And yet Switzerland had all along been claiming to be a democracy. What democracy that prevents half of its population not to vote? So you see, even that definition of democracy is questionable. So the other thing, on the issue of English and French, when we decided to make English our language of instruction, it was at the time I was the Minister of Education, and I'm happy to share the reasons behind.
Yeah.
You know, we never chose to be Francophone. Some people sat in Berlin in 1884, 85, and divided Africa, and we happened to fall in the hands of Germans. If the Germans had not committed the mistake of causing the First World War, we would be speaking Germans, not because we wished, but because it was imposed on us. They were repressed by Belgians, and Belgians taught us to speak French. Therefore, we said, we are very blessed to share one language, the Kinyarwanda. All Rwandans speak one language, Kinyarwanda. So to communicate between us, we don't need any foreign language. We can communicate using Kinyarwanda. To communicate with the outside world, we need another foreign language. This is the French. But we sat and say, if you are able to express yourself in French, you can only communicate with 250 million people around the world. But if you speak English, you can communicate with 3 billion people. If our people are going to make every effort to learn a foreign language, let them make an effort to learn English, because that is going to open a wider horizon for them. They will be able to communicate with many people. Then we also looked at the business, the science. If you are doing business, you have a far greater probability of being understood if you speak English. Especially, we looked at where our people were doing business. They were buying things in Dubai, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in South Africa, Thailand, China. In those places, if you go there speaking French, chances are that you will not be understood. But if you speak English, you will be understood. We were trying to claim a place in the world of science and technology. 95% of the publications are made in English. So we realized that our people would gain a lot if they were to master English. That's why we said we are going to make English our language of instruction. And then they will continue to learn French as a third language. So as if they are able to meet a French person, they can ask their way in French. So that is the system we've developed. And we are convinced that it is really giving, as you said, it is giving us a huge return in terms of how we are now connected with the world.
Okay.
We are attracting a lot of investment because investors are finding people they can discuss with, make deal with. But of course, it is not only the language. So we've created also an enabling business environment that is facilitating it.
Thank you very much. It's a very clear answer. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have two persons. We take them together and then come back. Yes, Mr. Kuroda, I think he's in New York. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Migande. Let me just first say that this is a country where I feel very much attached to because I was the UN Humanitarian Affairs Officer in New York from 1993 to 1996. So before the genocide and after the genocide, and I've been to your country a number of times before and immediately after and since then. So I feel very close to Rwanda, and also I met your president first time when he was still in hiding in northern Rwanda, in Burundi to be exact. But I have two questions, which if you could elaborate to the extent you feel comfortable. So I have seen over 30 years the progress made in Rwanda, which is really incredible. And the only other country that I can see such a progress made was probably China. So over 30 years, a lot has changed. But the one thing that hasn't changed is in your neighboring DRC. So that insecurity, I just would like to get your comment on how that could be resolved to some extent as you know, the DRC's UN peacekeeping mission is one of the largest and it just continues and continues. That's one question. The second question is, with all the respect I have for your president, what is your thinking as to how long or how long he wishes to remain there because of, I think, many tendencies these days for many leaders of the government to kind of hang on. So those are two issues, if you could elaborate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Professor Kumagai, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Merigande and Professor Kato. I have one quick question about reconciliation. I understand that there are several, different types of evaluation about the achievements, but I think it is more a matter of like whether glass half full or empty. And I think that we should not confuse the question of human rights violation and the issue of power politics or power struggles among politicians. So for me, I think the achievement is quite significant, and then there is at least no recurrence of violence, which is quite frequent in other countries suffering from civil wars or internal instability. Then my question is, what is the sustainability of this reconciliation in Rwanda? Maybe, as Professor Kato mentioned, that the well-designed program of economy sustained the good background for reconciliation. but I wonder there is any particular education or early warning systems to prevent any recurrence of violence and then to strengthen the reconciliation. I mean, you said that there's de facto transcendence of the identities of Tutsi and Hutus, and I wonder how that is possible. That is my question. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks, Professor Tanabe.
Yes, thank you very much. Just quickly, I'd like to ask about Rwanda's relation with France. Last year, two important reports came out. One is from French government and one is from US law firm, which was contracted by Kagame government. And both reports, they pointed out the French responsibility for genocide. Also, there is a difference of nuance. Then, as Professor Shinyo mentioned, after Kagame took power, Rwanda has been more closer to Anglophone countries and became the member of the Commonwealth member countries, and also English became the official language in 2009. And in spite of this difficult relation with France and Rwanda, last year President Macron visited Rwanda, and both presidents they agreed to advance the relation of two countries. So, what is the motive for President Kagame to change its policy against France and try to advance the relations? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Minister Murigandi, because of lack of time, I think you can answer all the questions in 5 minutes, or just one question in 5 minutes. In other words, you have just 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying to be as fast as I can. For the first two questions, they are a bit difficult, but the DRC situation, see the problem with DRC is that for ever since the decline of the Mobutu era, when Mobutu was going toward the end of his regime, the central government lost its grip on the entire territory. And then that created a conducive environment for groups to form because of the absence of the state, because the state was not providing the basic necessities, and the instruments of keeping law and order were so weak. We have a kind of geographical area where the government is not strong, and that has fostered a lot of militias. However, as you may have learned, the DRC has recently joined East African Community, and yesterday there was a summit bringing together the countries of East Africa, and they have agreed they are going to help DRC to bring to put an end to this presence of roaming militias and bring peace and stability in Eastern DRC. They are not really counting on UN because UN has been there for 23 years doing nothing. So that's why these governments have decided to join efforts and bring peace and security in that part. For how long the president, our current president, is going to remain in power, there are regular elections. If the people of Rwanda do not want him, they will vote him out of office. as it happens elsewhere. So probably if it depended only on him, he might have left, but because he's so much loved and liked and appreciated by the people of Rwanda, a lot of pressure has been on his shoulder to remain as our leader thus far. I don't know if the same pressure will be exerted on him in 2024, most likely because he's still very much loved and he has performed wonderfully and extraordinary. And he's still young, he's only 64. About the sustainability, Professor Kumagai, the sustainability of reconciliation, the good thing, which is not very much talked about, is the inclusion of young people in the governance of Rwanda. At all levels, we have the youngest government in terms of average of age in Africa, probably in the world. And we see a new generation of people who are committed to unity and reconciliation, stability and cohesion of the people of Rwanda. We shall, I think it is going to be sustainable because we are involving young people. The relationship between Rwanda and France, Professor Tanabe is asking what made President Kagame or Rwanda, actually don't reduce Rwanda to President Kagame. Yes, he is our leader, but he does it in the name of Rwanda and collectively as leaders of Rwanda. We have never been against France. We have always tried to have good relationship with France, but France was the one which was reluctant. Maybe for so many years, France hoped that their former allies, the people who committed the genocide, will capture power again, and probably the leadership of France has realized that this is a hopeless dream, and they decided to approach us. And we have had serious discussion, including these reports. These reports were ordered as a way of having a serious discussion. And we have always desired to have good relationship with any country in the world, France included, and we are happy to see that this has happened now.
Okay, thank you so much. So unless there is anybody who is very, very urgent to ask questions, if not, may I just ask Professor Kato, if in closing this session, maybe you'd like to just add one or two words?
Well, thank you very much. I don't have much to add, but as Professor Murigandi was saying, the leadership issues must be very important. And as I hinted in my observation, if the Rwanda is to attain the high-income country status in 2050, it has to keep growing at the rate of more than 7% for the coming 25 years or so. So the stable transition of power and the maintenance of development-oriented policies will be crucial for the future of Rwanda. That's what I learned from this discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I think we had a very good discussion. In fact, as I remember, that initially that Minister Murigande identified many achievements, but he was very honest to also list eight major challenges. And that Professor Kato mentioned, elaborated on the 3 of them. And as we had a discussion, going on, I think we have, in a way, narrowed down to the issue of the governance, and as Mr. Kato mentioned, the leadership. Now that President Kagame is or is not loved so much, but yet Minister Murigande says that elections do work. I just like to mention to you that 2 days ago, I received a note from Mr. Jose Ramos Horta of East Timor. He was re-elected president again, after 10 years. Now, he's 72 years old. Is he too old? Or maybe younger than me, so he's not that old compared with Biden and so forth. I think the leadership plays a key role in unifying the country and also addressing the very difficult challenges of trying to bring different ethnic groups together. And I think what I learned about Rwanda is very interesting, is that Rwanda chose the American model, whereas Rwanda's neighbor, Burundi, chose the United Nations model. What it means is this: according to the UN model, which Malaysia has, we concentrate giving rights to the minorities to make sure that the minority has a certain number of seats in the parliament and so forth. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Kagame said, no, all the Rwandans, Hutus or Tutsis are Rwandans. No more distinctions. And I understand the identity cards doesn't show whether you are Hutus or Tutsis. So in concluding it, I may just ask a very short question. Mr. Murigande, how is the intermarriages between the Hutus and Tutsis are taking place? Do you know? You have any idea?
Oh, yes, I know, because even in my own families, we have intermarriages. They are taking place at actually a rate that would surprise people who do not know Rwandans. Our young people have gone beyond these divisions, and where they meet other and getting married. Of course, some very old people are still having a hard time in blessing those marriages. But whether those old people like it or not, our young people go ahead and marry and form happy marriages. So I think we have a brighter future ahead of us because of our young people.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay.